At 3:42 p.m. local time, Taiwan Strait, the USS Higgins, a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carrying Spy-6 backfit arrays, SLQ-32 V-7 electronic warfare gear, and an MH-60R Seahawk on deck, is cruising a perfectly legal freedom of navigation transit. Sea state? Calm. Visibility? Excellent. Threat picture? Clean. Until it isn't. On the starboard quarter, a radar contact labeled Track 401 suddenly breaks formation. It's a Chinese-type 052D Luoyang 3 class destroyer, 7,500 tons of Beijing's modern blue water capability, or at least the brochure version of it. For the last hour, the 052D had been shadowing the Americans at a respectful distance. At 3:43 p.m., that respect evaporates. On the Spy-6 display, its speed jumps from a comfortable 21 knots to 26 knots in under 30 seconds. Its vector line swings sharply toward the Higgins. The closest point of approach collapses. 1 nautical mile, 800 yards, 500, 300, 200. In civilian terms, that's close. In naval terms, that's geometry normally reviewed during incident investigations. Bridge-to-bridge call goes out. Chinese warship, this is United States Navy Warship 76. We maintain course and speed. Your actions are unsafe. Request you maneuver to clear. The reply? Silence. And in naval operations, silence at 150 to 200 yards isn't confusion. It's not a lost radio. It's a message. We're willing to push this. Are you? Inside the Higgins Combat Information Center, nobody blinks. Nobody raises their voice. No one grabs the helm to do something dramatic, because this isn't chaos for the U.S. Navy. This is a Tuesday. The Chinese captain believes he's creating a moment of tactical dominance. Instead, he's creating a free intelligence buffet. The Higgins' upgraded electronic warfare suite begins dissecting every signal coming off the 052D. Sea Eagle radar, PRFs clustering between 2.7 to 3.1 kHz. Gas turbine IR bloom rising 40 to 60 degrees centigrade above baseline. Turn rate spike of 11 to 13 degrees per second during the helm input. Engine room harmonics bleeding into the water at 92 to 95 Hz. Narrowband S-band modes flicking in and out with a familiar modulation fingerprint. This is the kind of data intelligence agencies spend months trying to collect. Today, the Chinese captain is volunteering it at 26 knots. At 3:45 p.m., the Higgins plays the move that always changes these encounters. The Seahawk launches. An MH-60R lifts off the aft deck, banks left, and hovers low, deliberately, on the port side of the U.S. ship. Its multispectral camera immediately locks onto the Chinese destroyer's bridge. 4K daylight video, IR signatures, geotagged timestamps, crew movement logs, gun crews, exhaust plumes, everything. Any deviation becomes documented, timestamped, and archived. There is no ambiguity in 4K. At 3:47 p.m., the math finally catches up to the Chinese captain. The range is now 140 yards, roughly a soccer field, and the Higgins still hasn't budged a degree. The Type 052D blinks. Its bow shifts 10 degrees. Its prop wash settles as it drops from 26 knots back to 20. Only after the danger has passed does the radio crackle to life. You are approaching Chinese-administered waters. Alter your course immediately. Translation? We tried. It didn't work. Now we're pretending this was routine. Higgins replies with textbook calm. This is a United States warship conducting lawful passage in international waters. One Chinese crew member on deck throws his hands up, the universal "we're done here" gesture, and the destroyer drifts away. There's no collision, no bent steel, no missile locks, just a very public reminder. When the U.S. Navy refuses to move, Beijing has no plan B. But this isn't just an aggressive intercept. It's not a one-off captain having a bad day. It's the opening chapter to a much bigger problem, a Navy whose propaganda keeps outpacing its engineering. And nowhere is that contradiction louder than on the deck of China's newest supercarrier. If the destroyer encounter in the Taiwan Strait shows you how Beijing handles pressure up close, the next story shows you how it handles pressure at the national level. Meet the Fujian, China's shiny new Type 003 supercarrier. On paper, it's a monster. 80,000 tons, 3 electromagnetic catapults, a J-35 stealth air wing in development, KJ-600 early warning aircraft modeled after the American E-2. On propaganda posters, the Fujian isn't a warship. It's a graduation certificate. Proof China has entered the elite club of supercarrier navies. So when the ship was commissioned into the fleet in late 2025, you'd expect Beijing to throw a celebration big enough to block half of Shanghai's traffic. But instead, It was quieter than a library on a Tuesday night. No roaring fighter flybys, no triumphant carrier launch sequences, no nationalistic orchestra swelling in the background. Just a muted ceremony, thin attendance, and one detail that really raised eyebrows. Several senior admirals were missing, and in a system where showing up for photo ops is half the job, their absence wasn't an accident. It was a signal. Why so quiet? Because behind the banners, slogans, and CGI animations, the Fujian has a problem most propaganda departments can't Photoshop away. It runs on ambition. The power plant is still catching up. It uses electromagnetic catapults like the US Ford, but without nuclear reactors. Ford can throw 30-ton jets all day. Fujian relies on steam turbines and diesel generators, the electrical equivalent of powering a Tesla supercharger with a lawnmower. To launch a jet, it must 1. Build a massive power surge. 2. Dump it in 2 seconds. 3. Recharge the system. This creates a recharge bottleneck. In combat, where radar, jammers, and defensive weapons all demand power, that pause is deadly. If the timing is off by milliseconds, something has to give. And you hope it's not the air search radar. The launch footage Beijing released proves EMALS works once. It doesn't prove it works thousands of times under fire. Then there's the deck layout. Satellite imagery shows the waste catapult cuts into the landing corridor, meaning Fujian can't launch and recover aircraft at the same time. A 3-catapult carrier that functions like a 2-catapult carrier isn't parody, it's theater. And the air wing? Mostly medium-range weapons, J-35 not ready, J-15T still heavy. China's heaviest anti-ship missiles, YJ-12 and YJ-21, cannot be launched from carrier fighters, meaning Fujian's real strike range is regional, not global, the opposite of what supercarriers are built for. Fujian's commissioning wasn't triumph. It was a political deadline wrapped in an engineering gamble, a ship that is power-limited, sortie-limited, and untested in high-tempo ops. The silence of the ceremony said it all. The narrative is driving the data, not the other way around. And when a 80,000-ton warship runs on propaganda instead of engineering, the ocean always sends the bill. If the Fujian shows you what happens when China tries to copy America's surface fleet, the submarine force shows you what happens when it tries to copy America's silence. Spoiler? It doesn't. Because in submarine warfare there are only 2 kinds of boats, the quiet ones and the ones that get tracked. China's current nuclear submarines fall firmly into the second category. Submarine stealth isn't a matter of opinion, it's math. Every plus 3 decibels of noise doubles acoustic energy. Plus 6 decibels, 4 times the energy. Plus 10 decibels, 10 times easier to detect. And according to the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence, the last authoritative acoustic comparison publicly released, China's nuclear submarine fleet is stuck in a time machine. Type 093 attack subs, roughly equivalent to Soviet Victor 1 and 2 from the late 1960s and 70s. Type 094 ballistic missile subs, comparable to the Delta III from the 1970s. That's the acoustic profile of units that NATO anti-submarine crews used to classify as loud enough to track in your sleep. Modern estimates from academic and allied naval research put Chinese SSNs in the 120 to 140 decibel low-frequency band. Translation? These submarines aren't vanishing into the deep. To an experienced sonar operator, that hum is as distinctive as handwriting. Because of this noise problem, China can't send its SSBNs, the Jin-class ballistic missile submarines, into the open Pacific. They'd never make it. They'd be picked up by U.S. Navy undersea arrays, Japan's maritime self-defense force destroyers, Australian P-8 Poseidons, even passive seabed hydrophones, long before they reached firing positions. So Beijing keeps them in bastion zones, shallow, protected coastal waters in the South China Sea. But here's the problem. The South China Sea is one of the worst places on Earth to hide a submarine. Shallow, noisy, crowded, mapped by U.S. and Allied sonar surveys for decades. The oceanography itself is a submarine hunter. A protected bastion only works if your enemy can't map the area. The U.S. already did, in the 1980s. Western submarine forces, U.S., British, French, have a long list of collisions, seamount impacts, wire strikes, and terrifying close calls. That's not a sign of incompetence. That's a sign they're operating far from home, often in pitch-black water, pushing their hardware to the limit. China? Almost no public nuclear submarine accidents. This sounds impressive until you understand what it actually means. They're not going on real patrols. They're practicing near their driveway. The last time Japan publicly confirmed tracking a Chinese nuclear sub, A 093A, it held contact for over 2 hours, the broadband signature drifting only a few hertz. The Chinese crew never detected they were being shadowed. China's best hope is the Type 093B, spotted with a pump jet propulsor, possibly 12 to 18 vertical launch tubes, improved hull damping. A real improvement. But pump jets aren't magic. You can't glue quieting onto a reactor that requires high-flow pumps running even at idle. If coolant pumps are spinning, water is moving. If water is moving through metal pipes that aren't perfectly isolated, guess what? The ocean hears it. So does every U.S. Virginia class within 200 miles. Meanwhile, U.S., UK, and French submarines have spent 20 years perfecting magnetic bearings, anechoic coatings, pump jet designs, ultra-low vibration coolant loops, advanced quieting architectures. China is catching up, but the West isn't standing still. And while Beijing builds one new submarine, Washington has built 3. This isn't a race. It's a chase they're not gaining ground in. China's loudest undersea problem isn't machinery, it's culture. The system prioritizes political success, propaganda victories, world-class declarations, over uncomfortable engineering truth. A Chinese submarine engineer cannot walk into a meeting and say, "Our new boomer is embarrassingly loud," not without ending his career. So the issues get buried, the data gets massaged, the danger increases. And when a Navy starts believing its own hype, it stops learning. These 3 stories aren't random glitches. They're symptoms of the same problem. A Navy that promotes good news faster than it fixes bad engineering. When a fleet starts believing what it wants to be true instead of what the data proves, miscalculation becomes inevitable. And miscalculation is how wars start. So ask yourself, what's more dangerous? Fearing China's Navy too much, or assuming it's clumsier than it really is? Because the truth sits uncomfortably in the middle. China's Navy isn't weak, it isn't a joke, and it isn't backing down. It's growing fast inside a political system that punishes honest bad news, a combination that breeds overconfidence, not caution. That's how intercepts turn into collisions, tests become failures, and crises become shooting wars. The US Navy trains assuming everything will break. China's Navy trains assuming nothing will. And in the Taiwan Strait at 26 knots with 7,500 tons of steel closing the gap, that's a very expensive assumption to make. Bye for now.